This week, I sat down with none other than Asher Edelman, one of the first and most legendary corporate raiders in Wall Street history. Known for his aggressive and strategic takeovers in the 1980s, Asher helped define a new era of shareholder activism and famously served as one of the inspirations for the character Gordon Gekko in the famous movie Wall Street. After beginning his career in 1961 at Howland Stieglitz, he went on to found Edelman Company, leading bold corporate battles that shook the financial world. Asher didn't stop with finance. He later became a professor at Columbia, teaching corporate rating, the art of war, using Sun Tzu's The Art of War as his textbook. He also built a second career as a major player in the art world, running galleries and advising top collectors. His multidisciplinary life has spanned power, strategy, culture, and conviction. In our conversation, we talked about his early life on Wall Street, the tactics and psychology behind takeovers, the crossover between art and investing, and the lessons he's learned from a lifetime of bold moves. I really enjoyed this conversation, and I hope you guys do too. Thank you, Asher, for joining me. I really appreciate it.
My pleasure.
So I'm going to start off where I usually do, your kind of early life, your teenage years. And what I see in your teenage years is you were fascinated by art and finance at a pretty early age during your early teenage years. What drew you to both of them, and how did you pursue your interests in both art and finance as a teenager?
Art was something natural. The pictures in my parents' house and my grandparents' house were kind of second-rate impressionism. Somehow or another, I moved away from that, and when I was 12 or 13 years old, actually 12, I began to go to the Met, and I bought books in the Met. I still have some of them. And it became an evolution. By the time I was 18 or 19, I was buying student art and some other art, drawings and prints and so on. And so it really became the driving cultural part of my life, though music, dance, and et cetera were part of it as well. Are part of it as well. There was no light bulb moment. It just evolved. The finance side is pretty simple. One, I like math very much, and I didn't study finance, though eventually I taught at Columbia Business School. But the challenge of looking at numbers and seeing how things worked hit me as a kid. My grandparents and granduncle were friendly with someone called Bernard Baruch, who was a famous investor in those days. And he arranged for me to work from when I was 14 on during the summers at a brokerage house where I did such spectacular things as figure out when it was raining how you walked under the buildings to deliver the bonds and the stocks to other buildings. I kind of got a little bit into the analytics of shares with some of the people there. And so that was a start. But it was not automatic that I was going to go into the finance world. When I finished college, I was supposed to go on for an advanced degree. And I was asked by a friend's father if I might want to come down and work on Wall Street. And as I thought, I wanted to be a teacher. But I also, I was a little tired of living on student budgets and working in a bar and so on. So I took the job. Eventually, I got to be a teacher, but it was far away from the subject that I was interested in, which was developing countries. But anyway, there we go.
You're next. And can you kind of take us in a corporate raider, just kind of like the evolution of your career on Wall Street?
Yeah, I started out with a firm called Halley and Stieglitz, which was an international arbitrage firm, and was with them for 2 or 3 years. And then I went to a firm called Carter, Belind and Weil, which eventually became Citibank, but on the process, it became Lehman Brothers and American Express and a whole bunch of other things. Um, uh, and for them, I went to live in Belgium, and I developed a network, which eventually became Lehman Brothers, part of Lehman Brothers network, and I did that for about 5 years, and I came back and set up my first own firm, and ultimately it evolved into the arbitrage and mathematical ends of arbitrage and so on in my second owned firm. And eventually that evolved into converting certain forms of arbitrage into acquiring companies.
A lot of my listeners and a lot of people in the 60s, and a lot of people today didn't know what the environment looked like in the 60s. So can you kind of paint a picture for me?
The beginnings of computerization of Wall Street. The computers would take up a room the size of probably the room you're sitting in, and all they would do is sort out cards and print up statements. The ethics, morality, and club-like atmosphere of Wall Street was quite different. In the 60s, if you made a trade with someone on a telephone and it turned out that you lost whatever, 10,000, 20,000, whatever amount, either you would simply give it to the person, or he would say, okay, forget it, I forgive you. By the 70s, that trade would be in writing, and nobody would forgive anything, nor would the guy who lost the money be interested in paying. And by the 80s, it all became, what can we say? It all became a zoo, and the idea of ethics and morality, and the club became a cocaine users club at the end of the day, and it really got to be pretty disgusting. It's actually when I left Wall Street.
And what drew you to taking companies and arbitraging them? What drew you to kind of corporate rating and activism throughout your career on Wall Street?
So it all started out, well, first, Harry Markowitz worked for me when he was doing his beta theory, which won the Nobel Prize eventually. And we developed various hedging arbitrage techniques. And in fact, in the first part of the existence of the CBOE, we were the biggest traders on the CBOE, bigger than some of the houses who now control all of Wall Street. At the same time, I was always a value player in terms of investments. So we had an arbitrage, a merger arbitrage department, and sort of two things happened. I began to realize that I'm taking the risk for the companies who are buying other companies, and basically we're helping make those transactions happen. But we're taking the risk that if they lose interest or anything, or governmental problems, et cetera, we're the ones who are going to lose. And so I thought, well, what do you do about that? Well, what you do about that is you become the person who perhaps doesn't take the risk, and the arbitrageurs and the rest of the community can take the risk, and you move into that place. But the next thing that happened was a company called Canal Randolph. I got a call because we ran a desk, and we were more really in the trading world and the numbers world, and I got a call from someone who said, we have X number of shares of Canal Randolph for sale, and it really looks to be a very interesting company. It's got, and I was doing over-the-counter options and so on as well, and they wanted to do an option transaction to do this trade, and what they said was it's in the auction business. It auctions cows and pigs and sheep. And it's a very interesting business. So I said, okay, well, I'll take a look. And I took the file home on the weekend, and it wasn't in the auction. It was in the auction business, but that had very little to do with the business it was in. It was basically a real estate holding company, um, uh, kind of hiding behind an auction business. And it was selling in the low 20s. And my analysis, my back of the envelope analysis was it's worth in the 80s. And so I thought that was kind of interesting. And so I hired a company called East Dill, which was a specialist in real estate. And I said, I saw this thing and it doesn't make any sense. Can you take a look? And they came back with a similar number. And because in those days, shares didn't sell against their hard assets at all. Shares, and they still don't really. Shares sold on their earnings and their cash flow and their growth. And this was a very quiet company. In any event, so I bought the block, and then I decided, well, okay, you've been following all these arbitrages. Why don't you move ahead and do something about this company? Well, it was quite a war, and at one time I virtually had to risk all of the rest of my money to get control, and it was quite a hard decision for me because it isn't my nature. But we won the war, and eventually, actually within about a year, we distributed. And our average cost was in the high 20s. We distributed 90 some odd dollars in the first year on liquidating the real estate, and then continued to run the company until we could take it down to a complete liquidation, which probably worked out to around 110. So that was my first foray. Though I had bought sizable positions in companies that were undervalued, including oil companies in those days and so on, but I had never been active in making something happen. Yeah, I'd get to know the management and see if we could be helpful to them and so on. And also I was a kid, so nobody paid too much attention to me. But anyway, so then I thought, well, this was a nice thing, so why don't I go out and look for some more? And I found many more. And some of them worked very well. Some of them worked okay. And a couple of them didn't work at all. But in general, it was kind of a wonderful adventure. Getting into the 1980s, it became institutionalized. You know, to start with, it was Kravis, it was Icon, it was me, and those guys were bigger than I was. But then it became very institutionalized, and it became a bit rapacious, and began to, the whole of Wall Street began to interest me less. So I stopped.
And what qualities does it take to be an effective corporate rater or corporate arbitrager in your mind?
Well, I mean, they're two different things. So to effectively buy companies and make money on them, I think you have to understand what yourself really, what it is that you know better than everyone else, or think you do, about companies, and focusing on that part of the companies. Are you in a situation where it's undervalued for one reason or another? It might, like in the case of Prühoff, they had developed a technological breakthrough in brakes for trucks, and there was enough value there to support the company's price without the breakthrough. But the breakthrough was really very interesting, and so that was the focus. I mean, they had other things, but the focus was, what's this about and what's this going to be about? It's almost a stock pick. But so many of the other companies looked to be computer companies, and it wasn't particularly because I liked computer companies, but a lot of them had a lot of inactive assets. They had accumulated land to build more buildings and so on. And so we were able to get into the companies and liquidate the the unused assets. The thing that I found was that in my case, the concept of managing operating companies was not my bag. And so I had to figure more or less a way out of that side, which wasn't always easy. And the companies that we ended up with, the operating side, we made money out of them before that happened. But the companies we ended up with the operating side, you really had to change a corporate culture, et cetera. And that was not what I did. So I found some other people and eventually got out of most of the ones that required that.
And you mentioned the class you taught at Columbia Business School, Corporate Rating, The Art of War. Why did you believe The Art of War was an appropriate textbook for that class?
Oh, I think The Art of War is an appropriate textbook for life. And I believe The Art of War is something that one needs to read every month. And I don't do quite that anymore, but certainly whenever I'm embarking in a difficult position of one kind or another, not difficult, but challenging, I reread The Art of War because there are lots of levels to The Art of War. And at one time I was probably, maybe anyway, Walter Cronkite thought so, the only non-military person who was deeply into this book. And in fact, he did a 13-hour television production of people who knew the art of war. And I was, I guess, one of them. All the others were generals and people of war. I was a man of peace. So, but anyway, the art of war, it teaches you absolutely everything you have to know certainly for taking over a company, because it's all the things, it's all the strategies that you would have to spend a lifetime learning, but they're all in the book. And, simple things like a spy. Well, what does that mean to a businessman? He doesn't probably think of it, but maybe it made sense for him to have someone in management who wasn't necessarily giving him any inside information, but who liked him. And that's effectively a spy. And what about when to withdraw and when to move forward? Well, those things are pretty evident in the art of war. Or what about fighting wars and winning, but you've won them in such a way that there's nothing left? Is that a war you want to fight? And if not, what should you do with the transaction or whatever? So certainly it was useful in the class. Probably what was most useful in the class. It was a small class of 15 people because I limited it to that, and really bright people. One of them I'm still very close with and have done business deals with, but really very bright people. And what was really interesting is that the class was a seminar class, and the students would come in and they would present a case, and the other students would battle with that case, so to speak, and would look for the holes in it and how they would defend it. And so it was very practical. It was very realistic, and it was also extremely informational because they had this guidebook, so to speak, of the art of war, and then they had to look at the other pieces, the assets, the businesses, and they had to look at the management, the psychology of the management. How would they hit these people to get them either on their team or to get rid of them?
Yeah, I wish I was a part of that class. Sounds fascinating, fun. And the fact that only 15 people got to do it. Yeah,
it was a lot of fun.
During your, I'm wondering, during your days on the street, what skills did you see separate from those who just survived and from those who thrived?
it's so different now. I mean, it's a matter of of evolution, really. I mean, the people who survived and thrived in the 60s, it was about them and their personalities and relatively a little bit about their capabilities. The people who thrived in the 80s, it was really about their capabilities. And the ones who survived were just following, most people by the 80s just followed everyone else around. In the 60s, there was some level of independence of thought. When there was thought, there was less thought. But by the 80s, every transaction that one person or one leader did, the whole of that part of the industry followed those transactions and did the same type or the same transactions. And it was pretty uncreative. So the ones who could maybe be creative and the first into the transactions that made sense, I think, were the ones who succeeded. The ones who really failed are the ones who, were drinking buddies and nothing much ever happened except they did either what they were told or what the other person did.
Yeah, I find that interesting, and seems that there's been a lot of cultural change. I think cultural change has been kind of the biggest change in Wall Street over the past, from what I've heard and people I've interviewed over the past 50 or so years. What I'd like to ask you is, there's a lot of people who call themselves activist investors out there today. Are there any you admire?
I'm not really active enough to think about who that might be. I mean, and I sort of think about the negatives a little bit, which I shouldn't do. I don't like to do that. I mean, for example, I would say that Dan Loeb is among the most vulgar people who have succeeded in the industry. And so I don't admire him. And I don't admire how he does it. I don't admire what he does. And I don't think it's really very solidly based, but it works. I don't know. It becomes a very heady business. And to start with, I mean, I've had a lot of people young people come to me and say, kind of help me a little bit and coach me a little bit. And if I can, I do. But the minute someone starts to succeed in this business, they really become very caught up in themselves. And that doesn't really turn me on.
Yeah. I've especially with people that are more public facing, you can see it. You can see a lot of examples of it. But what I'd like to do is I'd love to shift a little bit into art. Some may know you for your career in art rather than finance. You told us a little bit about how your art journey began, but how did it evolve through your career on Wall Street and also after Wall Street? Tell us a little about it.
Well, I mean, like most people who are serious collectors, I really didn't like very much any kind of commercialization of the art world. And this goes to the 60s. In the 70s, it changes a little bit in that I became a lender to some of a secured lender to some of the galleries like Leo Castelli and Mary Boone and some of the more active galleries of those days. And but it still really, for me, was about art. It was just, I supported some galleries who I thought were special. And I still didn't like the idea of commercialization of art. I left that to the auction houses and galleries, and it wasn't something I was interested in doing. I was interested in building a collection and ultimately running a museum, etc. And it was not a museum of my personal collection, by the way. As time went on, I changed my mind. I thought, well, what's really wrong with being a lender into the industry? I mean, lenders make more money than galleries. They make more money than collectors. Well, not all collectors, but most. And why not do that? And then I began to look at other parts of it, financial parts. I was very early into guarantees and very early out of guarantees. And I began to look more and more at art as an investment. And as you probably know, we run now certainly by numbers of paintings and artists, dealt with the largest fractionalization company in the world. And it's really fun, and we try to identify in a number of different ways emerging and re-emerging artists who could become successful financially for investors. We also try to help them, the artists, because giving them, it essentially helps them have a stake at these moments in their lives where it's becoming something important. And helps the galleries too, who would like to support them but can't sell enough now, and it helps us too because it's a profitable business. And we do something that's a lot of fun, which was certainly my whole life in art as a non-commercial person, which is we're close with and in touch with the artists. We try to help them develop, especially after we place their work. We try to help them develop. We try to help them find additional galleries. We try to help them get publicity. We try to help them get into museums. So we have a whole active afterlife of these investments that we placed. And that's really the fun part, of course, of business is to make some money. And it's a profitable business, even it's the one we've just set up really what the business is. We were doing it ad hoc before, but the one we've set up in the last year, its first year, was profitable immediately and will become much more profitable this year. And that's fun. But the personal fun for me is the continuous contact with the art and the artists, and the need to pay attention to help these people succeed, and therefore the investments succeed. I like that. It's compelling and something everybody in the team, in my team, is interested in, and kind of a nice part of it.
And I have kind of two questions for you along those lines. One that I'm interested in, and one that I mentioned someone I was interviewing to you, someone close to me who's a large art collector, and he was interested in this. So first question, which artists are you excited about right now that you'd like to mention? And second of all, what are a couple of museums you recommend anyone visit in the world?
Recommend anyone what? Visit museums?
Yeah. What are a couple of art museums that you recommend everyone that people should visit at least once in their lives if they have the means to?
Maybe Pergamon in Berlin, which is an antiquities museum, perhaps the best in the world. Although they stole all the things, but that's life. It's not life, it's not right, but anyway, it is what it is. No, I can't pick, because I would want to pick something specialized, but I don't think that it should be specialized. Pergamon is different, but
yeah,
I can't say it shouldn't be a contemporary art museum. My world has existed in a serious way from antiquities to the present, and I don't know where you do that.
Any artists you're excited about, or you'd like to mention that you feel are up and coming and that you really enjoy?
I mean, there are a lot of artists I'm excited about. So maybe the most, I'm trying to find the right words, because I don't want to hurt anyone else's feelings, because there's nothing that I do, there's no deal that I do that I don't like the art. And So it's fairly hard. Okay, so I'll show you well, what's in my office. That's a very good way to start. Okay, so
I'd love that.
so let's see if we can get this picture. Look, I'm not very good at that. Okay, so let's. Oh, I see. There must be a better way to do this. Hold on. Look, there we go. I mean, you really can't see the picture, but that's a picture by an artist whose name is Moyosor Martins. Moyo Martins, if you like. And he is of Nigerian background, though his father was Brazilian. And he, did I lose you? No, okay. And he came to America, I forget how many years ago, but he began being known mainly because of my wife and me, in fact, and because of his work, but he was totally unknown. And by happenstance, Michelle got, it's a long story, but she got some photos of his work from him. And she actually had asked for the photos in order to be nice, because, you know, it's rare that something great comes. And when we saw the photos, I said, I think maybe we should go up and see the art now. And he had not really ever sold a picture. And since then, he's sold about 300 pictures, and that was 2021, I think, yeah. And he's had a number of gallery shows and museum interest and so on. I think that he is, I mean, what is art really about? For me, it's very much about painting. It's what I like best, although I like other forms of art, and I like some artists who are not great painters, but are great artists in other ways, such as Basquiat, who I discovered originally. And, but aside from liking painting, so what does art have to be? I think that it has to be original. The medium that it uses has to be used extraordinarily well. It has to ask questions. Art that answers questions is, in the end, less valuable, let's say. And I don't mean financially, but art should make you interested from the point of view of it's asking you something instead of telling you something. It has to be, in my eyes, challenging. It should need a great deal of interaction. Now, this is scientific stuff, and it isn't really what I think about when I see a picture. How do I think about pictures? I try to go into any viewing of pictures I haven't seen before without any taste. I don't want to be thinking about Jasper Johns or Picasso or anyone, or Basquiat or anything else. I just want to go in raw, and I don't want to think that I like X and I don't like Y. I want to go in raw. And probably the next day, during the night, in the morning, if it comes into my mind, if I hate it or I love it, it's probably okay. So that's how it starts. And then I think that I'm taking you to somewhere else, but I think that somewhere else is important. I think that if you're going to be, nobody is born with an eye. That's nonsense. And reading doesn't give you an eye. That's nonsense too. And great art needs an eye. It doesn't need a book. It's nice to have a book, but it needs an eye. And so the discipline of looking at art, which from when I was 18 or 19 until I was well into my 60s, looking at art 2 days a week, wherever you are and however you are. And it's very exhausting because it's an exercise of the mind, the heart, the body. But that's the way you get an eye, and that's the way you may discover at least art that's great for you, but you probably discover great art eventually. And whether it's known or it isn't known, I was a major collector of Cy Twombly when people didn't know who he was. I was the major collector of Bryce Martin. I was the first collector of Basquiat. I bought my first Jasper Johns in 1961. But it requires work, you have to look. So another artist I like, you can see there. And so the first artist is a young person in his 30s. This picture, which is by a woman who is in her 80s, and this is a new picture. And her name is Britt Butruscali.
Okay.
Britt Butruscali is Norwegian, but moved to Egypt and married her second marriage to one of the Butruscali brothers, and has been painting since she was in her teens, and still paints probably 200 paintings a year. And at one time was quite well known in Europe, but she got disgusted with the European museums and the galleries, and those she was given the King Olaf Prize for art. Only Munch had gotten that from her country of origin, Norway. She just didn't want anything to do with people. And she happens to be the mother of my wife. And Michelle said, this is really ridiculous. You're the most sought after painter, which is true in the Middle East. Everybody has one of Britt's paintings. Every king, every peasant, everybody has one of Britt's paintings. And it's really time that we expose you again in Europe, and you got the acclaim and the acknowledgement that you deserve. And it's worked. It's worked very well. And Britt she has a show in Berlin now. She's going to have a show in Korea shortly. She has an exhibition planned for Paris. She has an exhibition planned for London, and that's just in this year. And it's very exciting. But what's really exciting is the work. And a painting like this takes her a day. It's, I guess you'd call it action painting. So that's it's a remarkable paintings. And let me just see if I can put this out. But there are another 30 or 40 painters who are either emerging or re-emerging, who for me are very exciting. So this is Britt.
Yeah.
Like my wife, she's a great beauty. And this is another picture.
Yep.
Just for fun. This is, I think I own this one. It's the same one. They're pretty hot.
I like that one. Yeah.
87 years old.
Yeah, look at that.
2 years older than I am.
This is, go ahead.
Go ahead, I'm sorry.
Okay, so I asked one question to every one of our guests before we end the interview or we finish off. So you can say whatever you were saying before if you'd like to, and then we can get to this, but I just want to pose this question. If you have one piece of advice to give to a 15-year-old today, whether that be career advice, life advice, anything along those lines, what would it be?
Never stop what you can do that you like. I still ski every day of the winter. But it's important in all the phases of business and of life. Keep compassion and your possibility of dealing with poor people and giving something of yourself beyond what you take from the society. If for no other reason, it's good for you. You'll find it's good for everyone, but I mean, those are two things that I think are very important. The rest is mechanical. You know, I can tell you hedge your option this way and so on and so forth, but these are not mechanical things. These are about life.
Well, thank you, Asher. This has been a very enjoyable conversation, and I really enjoyed the art part of it. I've spoken with a lot of people who are big collectors, but I've never gotten this in depth. So it's been a lot of fun, at least for me. I hope it was for you. And thank you for joining me.